There was a very interesting article in The Guardian yesterday by Groy Greenslade, who I like a lot. He wrote essentially, he said, well, I'll read it to you. He said, "Back to the Future, were newspaper publishers wrong to go digital?" And he quotes an article by Jack Schaefer, just to make sure I get it right, in which they did a study, and it turns out that a huge number of papers that made the transition to digital are losing money. There's not enough much revenue in the online thing, and they think that most people, most newspapers should have stayed as print instead. I think they're wrong. In fact, I would go to the extreme opposite side. I think that the future of newspapers, if there is one, is not only in digital per se, but also in video, actually, which is something that most of them tried. They stuck their finger into it, and they never really accomplished it directly. The bottom line is newspapers need revenue, and there isn't much revenue in digital advertising and digital revenue and giving their stuff away for free, and the cost of producing newspapers is astronomical because you have to make the physical paper and deliver it and take it around, and each copy requires ink and paper. So they're caught in a quandary. To me, the problem is in the very term newspaper, news and paper. And I think they have to get rid of both of these things. First, they have to get rid of the paper because as much as I love books, and look, I still get the New York Times, and I get it in paper, and I like the paper, but it's archaic. The future is in digital. But let's talk about revenue. The real future is not in putting stuff online, text, and doing stories and stuff like that. Where is the money? The money is in television, for better or for worse. It's a huge industry. It pays a fortune. Newspapers are magnets for people who want to create content. That's why they go work for a newspaper. But you can create content besides text on screen, besides writing, besides print. And of course, my own personal interest is you can create content with video. And it's very easy to do. Now, if you look at the video that some newspapers produce, like the New York Times, they produce fantastic video across a wide spectrum of stuff. And this is the part that's important. There isn't a lot of money in news, so fine. News is a loss leader. News is important, but that's not where the revenue for newspapers is going to be. Newspapers in the digital sense. The revenue for newspapers and everything else is in the other content that they make. If you look at any paper like the New York Times, the paper is filled with arts, sports, science, medicine, music, food, you name it. And all of these topics have a global interest. The point is that if the New York Times, I use an example because I was very briefly the president of New York Times Television, and I took them into video, so I have some understanding. The video that they make about food, for example, the recipe things, cooking things with Mark Bittman, stuff like that, that has an enormous appeal in a global market. Now, I wrote to Arthur Sulzberger some time ago, and I looked at the videos on the Times, which, in fact, you could barely find on the website. You have to really want to find them, and they're all a mess. They're a jumble. And I said, let me take the video, you could put it on your website, and let me take it and let me market it worldwide. We could aggregate them, and we could put together half-hour shows about music, half-hour shows about cooking, half-hour shows about travel. The content there is incredibly valuable, and it's full of interesting stuff, and there's a worldwide market for these things. And I said, let me take it out and let me go license it around the world. And you can take it to, here's an interesting thing for you. You may not be familiar with this, but there's a meeting twice a year in Cannes, in the south of France, which I like to go to, called MIP and MIPCOM. And these are trade shows for all the television stations in the world. They half come as buyers and half come as sellers. There are more than 40,000 television stations between cable and satellite worldwide, and every one of them has to be fed with content all the time. They have an endless appetite for content. This is due to the explosion of cable. We all know, if we live in the United States, that you turn on your cable system and you get 1,000 channels, or actually I think in the United States there are 1,250 channels. You may not get all of them. And each of those runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They eat up millions of hours of content, but that's just the beginning, because this phenomenon, this explosion of going from 3 broadcast networks to 1,200 channels has happened all over the world. In Poland, there are 400 or 500 channels. Even in the little island of Vanuatu, which only has 300,000 people, there are 3 or 4 separate channels. All of them need content all the time. Now, places like Poland and Slovenia and Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic and the Slovak Republic and Korea, they don't have the internal production capability to feed all of their channels. There's no point in having a channel if you don't put content on it. So we have a divide. We have all these cable channels around the world. This is the book. I mean, look how thick this thing is. This is every television station in the world, and they all need content 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Newspapers can make content. It doesn't have to be news per se. Let's say news is 20% of what the paper makes. And in fact, if you look at a typical paper, news is really about 20%, and the rest is all kinds of other stuff. Fashion, sports, clothing, food, style, all that kind of stuff. That's all translatable to video and easy to make as video. And there is a market for this kind of stuff if you aggregate the stuff across the topic. So if you took newspaper video about food and you created a series of half-hour food channels based on the video that newspapers produce, it doesn't have to be from the New York Times. You can aggregate all the Gannett papers and make half-hour shows with some host that sits at a desk. But the point is, there is value to the content that newspapers, in a generic sense to call them newspapers, that newspapers or these media institutions can create. And if there's value, there's revenue. So if we took those half-hour food shows, sports shows, style shows, and stuff like that, and we licensed them around the world, and you might only get $500 from Polish TV and $1,000 from Slovenian TV and maybe $50 from Vanuatu TV, it doesn't really matter because you license the same thing over and over again. You can use that material to create enormous revenue streams for newspapers per se. Now, this is where newspapers can make money, but they have to stop thinking of themselves as paper. And they have to stop thinking of themselves as news. And in many ways, they have to get beyond the point of thinking of themselves as text, because if you really start to work with video in a digital sense, there's no difference between text and video and manipulating and putting it out. The point of all of this is that, contrary to this discussion about should newspapers go back to paper and stuff like that, a newspaper, any newspaper in the country, has the potential to be an enormous revenue generator, but they have to get out of their head the notion of either being paper or news, and instead wrap their head around video, but video done in the same inexpensive way that they make text. And that's all I got to say for today, but thank you. Bye.